Good morning. Can you hear me out there? All right. Welcome to the Saskatchewan Festival of Words. My name is Matthew Zanting. I'm a Moose Jaw resident, and I teach English literature just down the road at Briarcrest College. As I told one of the presenters this morning, I volunteer here, so I get to hear some great speeches. Before we begin, a couple things to note. I'm going to read a statement prepared by the festival. The Saskatchewan Festival of Words would like to start the day by humbly acknowledging that our work is carried out on what is known as Treaty 4 territory. This is the traditional territory of the Nehiyawak Cree, the Anishinaabe Saulteaux, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our organization is dedicated to honoring the treaties and is committed to reconciliation. Each year, we strive to curate diverse programming and create equitable access. Our work is guided by these principles, and we continue to educate ourselves and each other on diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, decolonization, and anti-racism. Throughout the year, the festival works with our partners at WACA, that's the Wakamo Aboriginal Community Association, as well as other Indigenous and cultural groups and artists. And it is through these community and artist collaborations that we continue our own learning and unlearning to question and challenge and to listen and understand. The Saskatchewan Festival of Words is proud to feature Indigenous voices from Saskatchewan and across Canada. Thank you for choosing to learn and listen. We also prioritize equity and the mental and emotional safety of marginalized people, people of color, LGBTQ+, and disabled people, etc., over the comfort of others. This is a safe space for everyone, and hate speech, insults, or rude remarks will not be tolerated. If you see something that concerns you, please contact one of the moderators or the festival directly. Also, this festival would not be possible without the support of our major funders, so we would like to thank the Saskatchewan Arts Board, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, and the Government of Canada, as well as a long list of program funders that will be shown at the end of this event. If you're in a business that you know supports the festival, please be sure to thank them for their support. Okay. First thing to do is to turn your phone to silent, please. I don't want anyone's embarrassing ringtones going off this morning. We want to start off on a good foot here. I'm going to introduce each presenter as they come up, and our first presenter for today is Bob McDonald, who may not need much of an introduction, but I'll try anyways. He was born in Alice Munro country up in Wingham, Ontario, but he has made a name for himself as a science writer and journalist. He began his career in media as a host for Wonderstruck, a children's science television program, before taking over as host of CBC Radio's Quirks and Quarks, a role which he continues to hold to this day. He has received numerous awards for his work promoting and explaining science to a broad audience. He was made an Officer of the Order of Canada in 2011, and he even has an asteroid named after him after the astronomer David D. Balaam requested it in 2014. Please join me in welcoming Bob McDonald.
Let me reassure you, the asteroid is not going to hit the Earth. It is out between Mars and Jupiter. It doesn't cross our orbit, so don't worry about it. When civilization gets wiped out, it will not be by Bob McDonald asteroids, so that's good. Thank you all so much for coming here today and for inviting me to be part of this historic word festival. I've only got 10 minutes, so I got to be really quick. I wrote this book because I was frustrated. I was frustrated because I've been reporting on the environment for, well, ever since I look like this. What? What? Come on. I dye my hair gray now, okay? You've all got a picture like this somewhere in a drawer. This is me in 1977. And I was asked by the CBC to do a 1-hour documentary for the radio program Ideas on climate change. 1977. And back then it was part of a series called Running Hot and Cold because there was a debate in the scientific community about which way the climate was going to go. On one side were the geologists who looked back in deep time, and they were saying, we've had 5 ice ages, and between each one of them, there are these warm periods that last about 10,000 years. We're in one right now, but it's been 12,000 years since the last ice age, so we're overdue for another cooling period. But the climatologists were saying, yeah, but there's a new game in town called greenhouse gases. They're going to overpower that, and it's going to get warmer. Well, we know who won the debate. We're seeing it. Well, look at the smoke in the air right now. And it has been frustrating for me through all these years to watch the predictions that the scientists were making since the 1970s come true. The scientists predicted that the temperature would go up. There are those 5 ice ages and the temperature that we're now experiencing. They predicted that the Earth would get warmer, especially in the Arctic. And the Arctic is now several degrees warmer than the rest of the planet. Why? Because they lost the ice up there. White ice reflects sunlight back into space and keeps it cool. Dark seawater absorbs sunlight and makes it warm. So that's why the Arctic is getting warmer. That was predicted. They predicted that storms would get stronger. Not that we'd have more of them, but they would get stronger. And we're seeing more powerful hurricanes and thunderstorms. That was predicted. They predicted we'd see droughts down in the southern states right now. Lake Powell and Lake Mead are down at record levels because of drought that they've been in. Here, I know you're still waiting for rain here in Saskatchewan, and we're seeing more and more droughts around the world. They predicted that we would have more forest fires, and we're certainly seeing that. 2 years ago, and I live in British Columbia now, and the whole province was on fire. You think you've got bad smoke here. It was like fog. You couldn't even see down the street. It was so bad. And so all of this has been happening. All of this has been coming true throughout all of these years. And what have we been doing about it? Well, governments have been getting together for these United Nations conferences, and I was at one of the very first ones, Rio, 1992. 92. And all the world's leaders got together and they said, yep, this is a problem. We got to do something about it. We've had 26 of these meetings since. And the governments say they're going to do things, and they do some, but it's not enough. It's still not enough. So they get together again and they move the goalposts. They said, let's set new targets. The next generation is not happy about that. They're not happy at all, because it's their future, right? And despite all the protests and despite all the proclamations about making things better, the bottom line is the emissions are still going up. They're still going up. There's a lot of progress, but the emissions are still going up, so we still have some work to do. There has also been, when it comes to climate change, a very active anti-climate change denial program that we now know is actually in part funded by oil companies. So we got to get over this. So I was getting depressed because all of the stories coming out of the environment are bad news. You know, the oceans are becoming acidified. We're losing coral reefs. We're losing species and habitat and all of this. And I thought, okay, I've had all these decades of pointing at the problem. What are the solutions? What are the solutions? What are we going to do about it? What happened to all of that alternative energy that we were looking at after the oil crisis of 1973? Where are we with solar power and wind and all this stuff? And I did some research, and I came to this wonderful, wonderful realization. And let me just read you the opening lines of my book. And it's actually on the back cover, the opening lines. Let's start with the good news. The technology to produce energy without carbon emissions already exists. There is as much solar energy beaming down from the sky onto the earth every hour than humanity consumes in a year. Energy blows on the wind, boils out of the ground, and literally grows on trees. A new green age is upon us. A new green age is upon us. We know how to capture the energy of the wind and the sun. We know how to get tidal energy. And by the way, in the book, I also put a lot of personal stories where I've experienced the forces of nature through mostly sailing, because I'm a sailor. I've been blown around by storms, things like that. So I incorporate personal stories into the book as well, to break up some of the science, to make it a little more readable, and I'll be talking about that in my next session. But we know how to do this. We know how to do this. So the big question, if we don't need to invent anything new to get energy without carbon emissions, why aren't we doing that? Why aren't we doing that? Well, first of all, there's the big elephant in the room, which is oil and gas and coal. Fossil fuels are amazing. And I don't want to make an enemy out of the fossil fuel industry. Because if you do that, if you say the evil oil empire versus the good tree huggers, that doesn't work. Because both sides just dig in. That's conflict. And nothing happens. We got to work together. So there are other ways to get energy out of oil without the emissions. They're described in the book. And the other thing is public and political and commercial and government work to move it forward. How do we do that? We got a big lesson when COVID happened. Think about COVID. COVID was an invisible threat to humanity that was floating through the air and killing people by the thousands. So what did we do about it? One, there were 4 elements that came together. One, science. The Chinese scientists, when they discovered the coronavirus, the first thing they did was sequence its genome, its genetics, and they sent that out to the world. And there was a huge international effort, including right here in Canada, to figure out how that virus infects your lungs and how it kills, and how to attack it with vaccines. 2, industry stepped in and said, yep, we can develop those vaccines, buy them millions, and get them out quickly. 3, the government stepped in and said, we'll support the science, we'll support the technology, and we'll tell people to change their behavior. Let's stay home for a while. Let's shut down. Let's wear masks, wash our hands, social distancing, all of that. And 4, the public bought into it. Well, most of us. There was a big protest in Ottawa with the truckers, but they were like the oil deniers. They were a small minority. But those 4 elements all came together, and we beat it in 2 years. Look at this. We're all sitting in a room now. We're not wearing masks, unless you want to. That's great. We beat it. And it was estimated that COVID took, during those 2 years, those 2 first years of COVID, about 5.5 million people around the world died from it. That's horrible. That's awful. But there's another statistic that I found out in doing this book that really scared me. Every year, 7 to 8 million people die from the effects of burning fossil fuels, mostly from lung disease from air pollution. 7 to 8 million people a year. And we just let that go. In other words, twice as many people died from fossil fuels as died from COVID. So we dealt with this invisible threat to humanity called the coronavirus. Let's deal with this invisible threat to humanity called greenhouse gas emissions, carbon emissions, and we can do it. The technology's there. I gathered it all together in this book. I hope you'll enjoy it. This was on the Canadian bestseller list last summer for several weeks, and the best feedback that I've gotten from it is that it's a positive look at the future. It's a positive look at the future. Let's do this. It's within our capability. We have the knowledge, we have the technology, we just need to implement it. We're doing it a bit, but not enough. So I hope you enjoy the book, and I'll let my fellow authors get on for here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Is that fast enough? Oh, yeah.
All right. Our second speaker for today is Dr. Paul Huebener, and it's a great pleasure of mine to introduce him because we went to grad school together and have known each other for a number of years. Paul is an associate professor of English at Athabasca University, but more importantly, he's a writer. In fact, he was a writer before he became an academic, as far as I know. I was once part of a creative writing group that Paul helped run. Paul has a wide range of interests, including time, the natural world, climate change, and a book coming out soon on sleep and cultural representations of sleep. I also happen to know on his most recent sabbatical from teaching at Athabasca, he wrote a fantasy novel for his 2 children, and he's working on the manuscript right now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Huebener to the stage.
Bob said click letter B on his computer to turn off the slideshow. Try that. Thank you. How's the mic? Is it working okay? Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you for that introduction, Matthew. It's great to be here. Thank you all so much for coming to the session. And huge thanks to the festival for having me here. It's my first time at the festival, and it's a wonderful event. As Matthew said, I work at Athabasca University, which is on Treaty 6 territory in Alberta. And I also have personal ties to Treaty 7 land in Calgary, as well as unceded land on the West Coast. A few years ago, I wrote a book about how people understand time, in Canada in particular, looking at representations of time in culture and literature. Everybody experiences time, so time might seem like a universal thing, but all kinds of inequities are tied up in experiences of time. So I ended up looking at how time is always, in some sense, political. And one of the things I looked at is what I call time socialization stories, which are stories or narratives that try to draw us into a particular way of understanding time. And the stories all around us, not just novels, but news reports, movies, advertisements, they all try to socialize us into a particular perspective on time, even if we don't really notice. Every story, every narrative has something to say about time, even if it's just in the way that it's structured or the way that it's told. And that means that, in a sense, every narrative is a time socialization story. That previous book didn't really ask how those ideas might be important for understanding the environment, global heating, or ecological collapse. So that's what Nature's Broken Clocks does. It asks, what are the stories that teach us how to think about time in the environment? And how do those stories work? And I decided that the idea of the clock is a good starting point, because the clock is really a story about time, or even a poem about time. So I'd like to read a passage from the book that looks at what kind of story the clock tells us. The image of the clock takes us in two directions. On the one hand, the clock stands in as the perfect figure for the quest to understand and control the flow of time. Even in a cultural world that is continuously being made over through globalization, automation, and electronic networking, the centuries-old notion of the clock still remains the ubiquitous symbol for the experience and management of time. The poetry of the clock is so successful, so useful, that we read and reread its metaphors each day. The time is 11 o'clock. The time is 6:45. The imaginative leap that we take when we read a clock is as familiar, as effortless as reaching for a light switch in the half-dark. Your body already knows the motion that will illuminate the room. The clock comforts us with clarity and purpose in a bewildering world. And this comfort deserves to be valued. It is the comfort of knowing a language or having a name. On the other hand, the perfect singularity of the clock makes the image madly inadequate for representing the fluctuations of time within the living, pulsing, irregular world of storms and droughts, hummingbirds and glaciers, poverty and wealth, grief and love. The flawless mirror of the clock can never truly reflect living beings. As the supreme icon of time, the clock has always been both elegant and broken. And there's a section in the book where I talk about skeleton watches. A skeleton watch is a wristwatch where the face has sort of been cut away so you can see the gears spinning inside it if it's a mechanical watch. And I thought this was a really useful image for thinking about encounters with time. Skeleton watches are hard to read because it's difficult to even see where the hands are on top of all the spinning gears. And I kind of like that because it shows, I think, that clock time is not some perfect essence of time. Clock time is constructed. So here's a passage where I think about some of the cultural histories that are contained within any wristwatch. These cultural histories inside a wristwatch include those of ancient Egypt, where daylight was divided into hours using a base 12 counting system. Babylonia, where the use of a base 60 counting system led to the idea that an hour contains 60 minutes. Medieval Europe, where the gradual development of mechanical clocks fostered the social importance of precise time measurement. The project of imperial colonization, which required miniaturized seafaring clocks that could withstand rolling motions and variations in temperature and humidity. Industrialization, which fostered the mass production of clocks as well as the precise conversion of time into profit. The First World War, where the need for soldiers to check the time quickly without digging around for a pocket watch led to the masculinization of the fastening of timepieces onto the wrist. And inevitably, contemporary consumer culture, in which manufacturers seek to make their watches impervious to weather, water, gravity, the decay of physical components, and the sensible management of personal finances. As Kevin Burth observes, a clock does not represent a coherent cultural system. It represents the sedimentation of generations of solutions to different temporal problems. These solutions have been implicated in violence and beauty, in technology and art, in shared identities and imposed conquests, in thoughtful negotiation with the natural world, and in immense environmental destruction. In one way or another, whether we strap a watch to our wrist or tell the time through some other means, we are implicated in the chain of cultural practices that have led us to this moment. The skeleton watch provides one small glimpse into this series of connections. Even if it makes a person squint to tell the time, the skeleton watch provides another equally important kind of legibility. And I'll read one last passage. There's a scholar in the UK whose name is Michelle Bastian, and she's got a really great definition for a clock. She says a clock is a device that signals change, a device that signals change in some way that is significant to us. So that means, by that definition, a clock doesn't have to be a machine with numbers on it. There can be other kinds of clocks that we might use to orient ourselves in time in different ways. And I play with this idea in the book because ultimately any kind of object, and I think any kind of narrative, can be a device that signals change, can be a kind of clock. And different clocks might reflect different forms of value or different forms of awareness. So here's one last passage. In its own way, just about any consumer product or indeed anything whatsoever ticks out a particular beat. A slice of cheddar cheese is a clock that signals the slow erosion of the caves at the village of Cheddar in Somerset, the evolving history of dairy farm agriculture, the maturing process for aging the cheese, the climate disruptions caused by methane from the cows, and the accelerative market forces of globalization. By Bastian's definition, the only thing that stands in the way of our understanding every object as a clock is our own consciousness. As soon as we see the ballpoint pen or the shrink-wrapped cucumber as a signal of the temporality of plastic, it becomes a device that helps us maintain that awareness. We might expand the definition further by suggesting that every object, every action, every process functions as a clock in waiting, even if we don't notice it. The fact that our orientation toward time is shaped not just through watches and clocks, but through any object we might stumble across is a parallel to the way that our temporal imaginations are shaped not just through the elegant gear wheels of poetry, but through the stories we encounter daily in such mundane places as advertisements and political news releases. An object doesn't need gear wheels to be a clock, and narratives are not just things we find in novels. Thanks so much.
Our final speaker for this session is Miriam Körner. She was born in Germany, but moved to Canada after some initial experiences in the north. She has made this country her home since, and has journeyed south to us from her home in northern Saskatchewan, which she also shares with her husband and 12 sled dogs. She writes and illustrates children's literature, has published numerous pieces in magazines documenting her travels, and has pursued a lifelong passion for photography. Please welcome Miriam to the stage.
Oops, you have your phone. All right, how does this sound? All right. Yes, I'm a children's book author, so usually I read to 5-year-olds. But I think the story is just as important for adults. I'm going to read to you a short little fable today called Fox and Bear. Now, Fox and Bear are quite different characters. Fox is, like most foxes in European fairy tales, quite smart. In fact, if he lived in our world, he might have had 13 honorary doctorates. But he lives in the forest, so there's no universities there. Still, he is, as you will find out, quite inventive and industrious, and he wants the future to be here now. Bear, on the other hand, is quite easygoing and good-natured. Some say he's a bit naive, but I don't believe that. Maybe scatterbrained. What is interesting about Bear is that he lives by his own time. While around him, nature's broken clocks accumulate, his inner clock is ticking exactly at the right time. So here goes. I need to find this one. Oops. Every day, Bob and Paul went into the forest to gather what there was to gather and to catch what there was to catch. Bear loved picking berries, Fox loved hunting eggs. At noon, Bear took a nap on his favorite tree and listened to the birds sing. Fox went looking for treasures. In the evening, Fox buried his treasures. Bear watched the sunset. Life was good, thought Bear. Picking berries and mushrooms, hunting ants and mice, catching rabbits and birds, kept them busy day after day. Wouldn't it be nice, said Fox one day, if we didn't have to hunt and gather all the time? What would we do all day? Asked Bear. Fox thought for a while. I could hunt for even more treasures, and you could watch even more sunsets. That would be nice, said Bear. I have an idea, said Fox. The next day, Fox and Bear gathered more berries and seeds and caught more birds than ever before. Bear planted the seeds and Fox built cages for the birds. When all was done, the sun had set. Never mind, said Fox. We'll watch the sunset tomorrow. That would be nice, said Bear. Every day, Fox and Bear watered the seedlings, caught bugs to feed the birds, fixed the cages, and collected eggs. There was no time to rest on Bear's favorite tree or listen to the birds sing. It was after sunset when Fox buried his treasures and Bear watched the fireflies light up the sky. Wouldn't it be nice, said Fox, if we didn't have to do all those chores? Imagine what we could do with our time. Bear imagined how many more fireflies he could watch lighting up the sky. That would be nice, said Bear. I have an idea, said Fox. The next morning, Fox drew up plans, Bear dug up mountains and cut down trees. Fox invented and Bear hammered. Oops, am I going backwards here? They built an egg collector, a bird feeder, a water sprinkler, and a berry picker. When all was done, even the fireflies had gone to bed. Every day now, Fox and Bear cut down more trees to burn in the steam engines so the egg collector could collect eggs and the water sprinkler would water the plants. At night, they filled the bird feeder and fixed the berry picker and built more cages until it was almost sunrise. Wouldn't it be nice, said Fox, if we had bigger engines and faster machines? Imagine how much more we could do. But Bear was so tired, he had no imagination left. Wouldn't it be nice, said Bear the next day, if you didn't have to work all the time? What would you do instead, said Fox. So what I was asked to do a different reading tomorrow, so I have one page left. I'm going to read that tomorrow. But I am going to share a little bit about the inspiration about the writing of the book. As I was mentioned in the introduction, I live in northern Saskatchewan. That's in the heart of the boreal forest, and the traditional territory of the Woodland Cree and the homeland to the Métis. And I used to live there quite happily. Like Bear, I like to pick berries, and I share my backyard with ravens, grouse, squirrels. And if I could, I would live in the forest all year long. And in fact, last summer I went on a little canoe trip for 72 days. And so I really love the forest. I think it's a magical place. And I thought this forest would be there forever. I was wrong. So when the clear cutting started around the trails where I used to be, I was sad, very sad. And it isn't just the clear cutting. It is the silicate, it is the uranium, it is the rare earth metals. All these clean and green energies are being taken out of the north and destroying our waters, destroying the traditional trap lines, destroying the animals for the people that live there, that make that their home, that love that forest. So I had lots of questions. Where do the animals go when their forest is destroyed? Will the birds build new nests? Does the forest cry at night? Do the people who cut down the trees cry at night? And what I really wanted to know is, do we really need so much lumber? You know, every third tree, I think, is turned into paper and toilet paper. Had we maybe gone wrong? And when? Where? And why? I didn't have any answer to these questions. But I had an idea, a story. Because I believe we're leaving it to the next generation of children to fix the problems that we are in. And in order to do that, they need to understand how we got there. So what Fox and Bear really is, it's the setting of the agricultural revolution and then the industrial revolution. And children need to understand that we had the power to create that. Because if they understand we had the power to create that, they understand we also have the power to uncreate it. All right. I don't know, start just maybe. No, how am I going to get this off? There.
Okay.
Can we switch the...
We are going to have Q&A. Can we get the screen up and the lights up a little bit so it's not so bright up here? And you can just leave your headset on.
Yeah.
And I'll invite our panelists up to the seats in the front. So we've got plenty of time for questions. Who wants to start?
Can we switch the blue light off?
Oh, Oh, get the projector.
The projector. The projector.
Put the lens cap in front of it.
It's very different. I've read it to like 5-year-olds and high school students, and yesterday to a 4-year-old. And when Fox started putting the birds into cages, she said, "He can't do that. Why is he doing that?" And so they have this inherent sense of what is right and what is wrong. But what she didn't know is that the dinner she was eating the same day came from birds in those cages. And I don't think we need to protect our children from that. We need to make them understand what we're doing. And then older children, they're very quiet. They're kind of not interested when I read the book, but when I put the presentation on, I got their attention. And lots of time they come back to me afterwards and they say, I often can't sleep at night. I'm anxious. I'm scared. I'm going into policy because the politics are not doing anything. I want to be a politician. I want to change things. And then also the book is kind of open-ended. And maybe I give it away. Bear in the end just turns around, goes back in the forest, and Fox looks a little bit puzzled. And I ask kids, what do you think Fox is going to do? And it's really interesting to see some say, oh, he's going to build bigger and faster machines. And the other half says, I think he's going to follow Bear. So how do I switch this off?
My question is for Bob McDonald, and I wondered of the new technologies that you say already exist.
Do I have which one is better? None of them are. None of them are. Your energy in the future is going to come from many different sources, including your own home. So we've been spoiled with these large projects that supply large areas with energy. But there's some exciting discoveries, especially in solar. For example, we think of solar farms as these huge things that cover many, many square kilometers of land, which is one way of doing it, but the argument is, well, that land could be used for agriculture. Well, there are other materials that absorb sunlight and turn it into electricity called perovskites, and they're transparent. Light goes through them like a window, but they still generate electricity, so you can coat windows with them. So you think of all the skyscrapers we have in our big cities that have that huge surface area. They also have perovskite paint. So you paint your house, and it's solar. Even inside, you put perovskite paint on the inside of your house, and you recycle the light from your lights. It goes back into the walls and is turned back into electricity. So solar will be incorporated into buildings. You won't even know it's there. So that's the kind of thing. And we have energy on the tides for people living on the coast. We have energy geothermal and different things. So depending on where you live, energy will be coming from different sources. And that's the future, including nuclear. We're going to rethink nuclear because they're going small, little nuclear reactors that you put underground, and they can power an entire town, and you never touch the reactor. Nobody ever gets to it. So that's the future to me. It's not one thing. It's a variety of things, and I find that very exciting to do it.
Very scary.
No, it's not scary. I don't think it's scary at all. I think it's less scary than what we're doing now. You know, people, there's a new campaign out to go against electric cars. I'm seeing people saying, oh no, they're really bad because of the lithium and the cobalt. Cobalt comes from Congo, and they have child labor issues there. And lithium, there's mining involved in that. And yep, there is. Every source of energy that we have has issues that we have to cope with. But what we're doing now, as I say, 7 to 8 million people a year are already dying from it. You think about what goes into a liter of gasoline. What goes into a liter of gasoline? Well, first, you have to drill for natural gas in northern Alberta and Saskatchewan, pipe that to the oil sands, use that to heat up the sand to get the oil out, then pump the oil using big pumping stations down to Texas, where the oil refineries are, use more heat to heat it up, get the bunker oil, the diesel, the gasoline, all the different products we get, then ship back up to Canada, distribute it to all the gas stations, then you come along in your car, and you put it in your car, and your car burns it and just blows it into the atmosphere. Billions of tons of it every year, and we just let that go. We just let that go. So let's compare to what we're doing now to what we could be doing that's a lot cleaner, and the cleaner options, I think, are less scary. Less scary. They're not burning up the atmosphere. They're not, climate change is in our face right now. And so let's find other ways to get energy out of the sun, out of the wind, out of the ground, out of oil that don't involve those emissions. And it's doable, and I'm optimistic about that. I'm not scared at all. I'm scared if we keep things the way they are now. That scares me. What feedback have I gotten from the alternative energy sector?
From the movers and shakers.
From the movers and shakers. Yes. Politicians are, they want votes, and they're afraid of losing votes, and they're also very heavily lobbied to not change, and we're an oil-producing country, so we're not going to let it go, and that's okay. But we can adapt how we do that. But I believe the change is not going to come from the top down. I believe the change is going to come from the bottom up. We're already seeing more electric cars on the road because people who own them love them. They go like hell. When I was a kid, my favorite car, my dream car was a Pontiac GTO with a big V8 engine in it, 400, whoa, that was really great. Well, a Tesla can blow the doors off a GTO now. It's totally clean. So we're seeing more of them. And the more that are out there, all the manufacturers are now making electric cars because people are buying them, and the price is going to come down, so you're going to see more of them. So where the government can come in is to provide infrastructure. Just like they provide roads, they can provide charging stations and help with that. And then you get the neighborhood effect. I met a guy just recently. He put solar panels on the roof of his house, and he drives a Tesla, and he got a home charger. So he charges his car from his house. He drives for free. He drives for free. So that happens in a neighborhood. One person does it. The other neighbors say, hey, you're driving for free? I'm going to do that. And then there's a neighborhood effect where it takes on. Then the politicians look, oh, there's a trend happening in the public. Let's support that. So that's how I believe the change is going to come about.
The politicians are already supporting it. They're encouraging mining in northern Saskatchewan. They're very favorable. There are very few environmental regulations because they want to take these rare earth metals out of the north for so-called clean energies. They're digging under lakes. They're taking water out of clean lakes, putting the effluent back into undisturbed water systems. And in Sunny Bay, they're just fighting a mine. The water is going to go into the Sturgeon River, into the Cumberland House Delta, and one of the most pristine ecosystems. And indigenous peoples in the north are extremely unhappy. That's their sustenance. And they say, those are our medicines. The animals are eating this contaminated plants, and we are eating those animals. And we've seen the direct impacts in the north of the so-called clean energy, and so that's what my comment was about being scary.
Yeah. Question for Paul. How are your seen it?
Right, yeah.
And what is the reaction deeper than that in terms of what you're trying to get across in your writing?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a faux pas to make students buy my own book, so I don't make them read it.
Start somewhere.
But I have had the chance to run some experiments with them where I tell them, okay, this course or this semester or the next couple of weeks, I want you to go and encounter time in a way that is different from what you usually do. Just do something different with the way that you use time or the way that you approach time, and then write about it, tell me what happened. It doesn't matter so much whether you succeed in whatever this new approach to time is. It matters what you make of it, what it teaches you. And so I had one student who had read that in medieval Europe, people supposedly slept in 2 segments throughout the night. They would sleep for the first half of the night and then get up and do some things and then sleep again. And we stopped doing that once we got light bulbs. And so she decided, oh, I'm going to try that. So she tried it for a couple of weeks. She got up in the middle of the night, divided her sleep into 2 segments. And then one of the things it taught her is that her roommate really didn't like that. And so that was a chance for her to think about what are the cultural norms around time that sort of structure our lives, and to what extent can we push back against those, and to what extent are we restricted. And so I really have a lot of fun whenever I have a chance to ask people to engage in their own sort of time experiments. Sometimes I also have the chance to ask people to choose something around them, choose an object, and think about what kind of clock it is. And people might choose anything from a smartphone to a Raspberry Patch, and think about what are the values of time that can be expressed through our encounters with this object. What is it made of? Where does it come from? Where is it going? How long will it be on the earth? And what does it teach us about how we can experience time?
I guess what I'm driving at too is how does what you're giving them in your analysis and your understanding of time, does it give them a better sense of how fleeting their youth time is, and how to make greater invest or get more out of it at that time in their lives?
I guess that's not really my main goal. Yeah. Well, and some students are in later stages of life too. They're not all young adults. But I'm more interested in sort of asking them to develop a literacy of time, just to be aware of how they can question narratives of time and experiences of time. Not so much because I want to point them in a particular goal-oriented direction, but more so I can see what they come up with that surprises me. Because the most fun for me is when they surprise me, I think.
It's mostly who dye our hair gray who realize how little time is left, you know. And then as Einstein said, that's all relative.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because one of the things I ask in the book is what is natural time? Is there such a thing as natural time? And there really isn't one thing, because the ecosystem and the natural world involves many, many different forms of temporalities, and therefore many, many different ways in which they can break down. And there are incredible conflicts that arise when we try to impose a particular structure of time onto ecological processes that don't really match up with that. But right now, I mean, there are a bunch of different examples I look at in the book, but at the moment I've really invested in the temporal experiences of bear and fox, because I think there's a lot going on there. I mean, fox is the productive go-getter, and that's how in our society, we often want to impose that kind of productive efficiency onto the world around us, including ecosystems. Bear, I think, belongs to the slow food movement. He wants to slow things down a little bit. And that kind of initiative to slow down can be really helpful, but it has limits. Slowness is not always the answer. There are things we need to accelerate, like cutting greenhouse gas emissions. So it would be too simplistic to say we need to get back to nature's time or slow down. It's more about developing the ability to tell the difference. When is speed appropriate? When is delay appropriate? And one of the things that I say in the book is that we need to notice whose vision of time or whose clock is imposed in a particular moment, and what are the values that are put forward through that vision of time.
That is a wonderful place to stop. So I'd ask you to please thank our presenters again. Just a reminder that the authors' books are on sale in the basement of the Art Museum, so down below, and the authors will be down there following their sessions to sign books. The festival is a registered charity and receives a percentage of the book sales back from McNally Robinson. And if you have time, the festival values feedback, whether positive or negative, and we need your suggestions. Please fill out your evaluation form and hand it in, thereby becoming eligible for a prize draw on Sunday. There's always a carrot to draw you towards these things. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of the day.